Hi, visual storytellers. This is Carol's contribution to what not to do on your infographic and what to do to make it better. It's my contribution of do this, not that. And why do I have a skeleton on this opening slide? Is because some of these things are things that scare me. The first thing to do, align your text left. Now, I'm not saying that it never makes sense to center align text. It made sense to center align the headline on this infographic because it's centered over the whole infographic and because the text is big. Remember, you never want to center blocks of text. And yet some of you, when you're designing this, are going to feel an impulse to do so. Left alignment is easier to format and it's easier for the viewer to read because it's how we read. So align your text left. You're not being artier by centering it. So do this. Do this. Don't do this. The designer of this infographic has three alignments, right? She's got alignment here, except different indents. Now I was so proud of her for doing this infographic because she made this ice cream cone. She hadn't used it in design before. So I love her intention. However, this centered text, these centered blocks of text are very visually confusing. She would have been better if she had just used left with indents here or bullets and then left aligned here. Part of the issue is that by centering the text, you have this very visually messy and confusing spacing, and there are no real columns. So she needed alignment here and alignment there. And another note about this is the explainer for the infographic. And the explainer needs to be with the headline because our eye does not want to go from the headline down to the bottom. It wants to go from the headline to this. So this is going to lead to my next point, which is proximity. Put things together that go together. And it's also going to lead to another point about color, which is make sure that you put dark text on light backgrounds and light text on dark backgrounds. So white text does not work on pale yellow. Proximity. One of the ways to solve an alignment problem is to put space between elements that are not connected. All of these elements are connected, of course. They're connected to the timeline and the thermometer. But each one of these discrete little groups of text forms a unit. And it forms a unit because Courtney has put space between each one of them. If Courtney, she's also aligning with the lines on the thermometer. I mean, she's doing a lot of right things here, but the main one I want you to pay attention to is that she's putting space between each related group of text. Remember, proximity relates to the way our brain works. Our brain perceives information or things that are together as a unit. So you want to put the things that are related together as a unit. It wasn't obvious in her first draft that this text went with these photos, so I suggested the arrows to create a connection that wasn't really possible to visually create without them. So we have a proximity, do this, but don't do this. Take a moment to look at this. Now, using 2 columns, awesome. Pretty nice job with type design, although this needs an explainer. But what text goes with which image? Proximity would tell you that this goes with this, and yet this block of text actually goes with the photo. So what needed to happen, rather than creating vertical columns, this designer needed to create horizontal columns. So a column here, I mean, it's not really a column, it's a unit. Eric and I are going to keep talking about how you want to use a modular format. It's boring, but it does make sense and it's easier to design. So if you created a unit here and a unit here and a unit here, this would have created allowed the designer to create a clear connection between the text and related photos. Another example of a proximity, please don't do this. Modular format would have solved the problem here. Also, making everything smaller. Some of you are going to have an impulse to fill all the space. And by fill all the space, I mean really literally all the space. Please resist that. Remember that space helps group things. So if this designer had made some horizontal boxes or units here and put the image and the related text in each horizontal unit, this would have made this visually a lot clearer. Also, he had the impulse to fill the space, so he actually changed the type sizes to fill the space. And you don't need to worry about that. If this had all been, this is probably an at least 12-point type. Think in terms of using 10-point type, 11 maybe on your infographic. If this had all been 10-point type, it might not have filled this entire space, but that's okay, because what it would have allowed him to do is have these separate, discrete, this discrete kind of modules that he put the text in. This also could have probably used headings for each one of these, so we understood what the text was going to be about. Modular layout. Do this. Now, there are actually three, this is laid out on a 3-column grid. There's a column here, a column here, and a column here. But the designer is making modules by combining and going across 2. This is really good layout. It makes a lot of visual sense. Everything, the text and related images are all contained within their own modules. There's space between them. The modules themselves are a color, which helps. They could have also been framed, but I like the use of color to create distinction between each module and move the eye. This, the headline, this, the explainer. It might have made more sense to mess with this a little bit, like to have this on the left. In other words, to flop this with this and move these over, but this works really well. She created this in InDesign. She designed and so she designed her own template. So make a module. This is also a module. This is a more simplified module. As I talked about on several others of these, or a couple of other of these, if you create modules of same size, this is a little deeper than the other one because she had more information, but that's okay. She's created essentially 4 modules. 1 for the headline and the explainer, 3 for the text, and then 1 for the sources at the bottom. You create one module, you lay it out, and then you make each other module the same. Back to this example of where modular layout, doing this on this would have solved the problem of visual connection. And notice too, by the way, how proximity, how much space. This text type is probably 10, and she's using consistent 10-point type throughout. She didn't make this bigger to fill the space. She also has the same size letters. She also has left alignment, so everything is aligned. So when you're thinking about designing your infographic, make some decisions. How big is my type going to be? Use that consistently. How big are my headings going to be? Use that consistently. How big are my modules going to be? Use that consistently. And your job of doing something that's clear and attractive will be easier. Color contrast. Do this. We're back to our thermometer. Light blue background, black text. That stands out. Let me repeat. Dark text, light background, light text, dark background. Notice black stands out on light blue. White does not stand out on light blue. This is a great infographic. It's got, good graphics, little bar charts she created. She's using modules. She's put space between them, so proximity and the relationships of this text are very clear. The only thing was she opted for white text instead of putting it on a dark background. If the text had the background had just been this dark down here, that would have been easier to read. So, check it with your eyeballs. Know too that if something were printed out, it would end up being even lighter, but just make sure you check it with your eyeballs. And if your eyeballs go wonky working on this, as they sometimes do, then have somebody else look at it and ask them if they can read the text. And my second to my last do this is text formatting. One of the things that distinguishes between super novice design and more advanced design thinking is what you do with text when you have it in a frame or in a background. A color block background is essentially a frame. If you're in InDesign will not automatically move this text away from the side. InDesign will just, if you have a text box here and you frame it, I'm going to show you how to do this in a second, but if you have a text box here and you frame it, this text is going to be right up on the edge of that frame. Now this student, so proud of Brenna because she had never designed in InDesign before. And so of course she spent a lot of time working on this, making all of these little images in InDesign, and maybe some of them in Illustrator. So there's a lot in here that she's working with, which made this complicated. But her original version, all of her text was running up against the edges of these frames. And just that simple change really made this a lot cleaner looking. It's a matter of mechanics, right? It's like hanging a picture straight. This is how you hang the picture straight when you're formatting your text. And here's another beautiful example of a student with a lot of experience in InDesign and Illustrator who created this infographic last semester. Claudia is created a refrigerator here, right? With some little, this is like little Post-it notes that are stuck on the refrigerator, but she has beautifully formatted her text within the frame. Okay, and I'm just going to add another do this. She's using one typeface on here. You should not use more than 2 fonts. Did you hear me say that? 2 fonts. But one works great when you're using different weights and sizes. It's very clean and it makes a decision for you, right? You should never use more until you really know what you're doing. You shouldn't be using more than 2 fonts on a page. So how do you do this? Well, here in my first example, which I created, you can see if I were going to put this is a light bluish purple background. If I were going to put text on it, you see this is what happens. This is what InDesign will do with the text. Compare that to this. Now, how did I get here? I highlight the text. So I highlighted this text. And then if you go down the right rail, the tool rail, what you will see is you will see these tools for paragraph. This one with the line here, which is indicating that it will move the entire block over from the left, and this line here, which is showing you that it will move the entire block over from the right. I set it at 0.8. Now you also want it centered in the frame, and the way I did that was I just put the cursor here and then put in a return. There might be some other better way of doing that, but that's the way I chose to do it, and that is the way you can make that work. What happens, though, if you've drawn a frame that's this size and it needs to fit and the text is too long, you have to edit your text. Don't change the type size and make it smaller, right? So when we create graphics, when we're laying things out with text, we edit. If the text does not fit, don't change the text size, but edit the text. And here is a final super pro tip for formatting, is you notice how I've gone in and put in returns so that there isn't a single line here that ends with a word broken on a hyphen. If you're setting a big block of text, that doesn't matter so much. But when you're setting none of your text on your infographic should have set the ends of lines end with a broken word and a hyphen. You should fix that for all of them. And last but not least, don't do this. Typos. Take a moment to see if you can figure out where the spelling error is, the obvious one in large text. Britain. It's not spelled Britian, it's spelled B-R-I-T-A-I-N. Now here's the deal. This was an honest mistake. This is so easy to do. It's so easy to make typos in your infographic because when you're in InDesign designing, you stop being focused on the text. There are two ways to get around, well, three ways of avoiding this. One, write your text in Word and then cut and paste it. If you write it in Word, you'll be focused on the text and and then Word spell checks. Your other option is to go down the edit menu and pick spell check from the edit menu in InDesign, and it will check your spelling. Now it's not going to check for words that are just misused, like you want the word weather, W-E-A-T-H-E-R, and you get W-H-E-T-H-E-R. It's not going to solve all your its and all of your grammar problems, but it will catch your mistakes. The other thing you should absolutely do is have someone proof your work for you. Trust me on this. And everything that I send to you, every announcement I post, I proof myself. But I bet if I go back and look, I would probably be horrified to see the mistakes because we can't proof our own work very well. That's why we have editors. So proof your work and don't make typos in your infographic. That will disqualify it from being portfolio work until you go back and fix them. And there will be penalties if there are typos.